everyone. My name is Anastasia Yu, and I'm a doctoral student in school psychology. I am also a practicing psychologist and a BCBA. Working with people with special needs and wearing multiple hats, I realize how it's important to understand cognitive profiles to better target treatment development. And thank you, Gloria, for coming here and giving us this presentation about this whole thing.
Thank you, Anastasia. So my name is Gloria Maria Alstrich. I'm a school psychologist, and I'm a retired school psychologist, but also I'm actively engaged in my private practice. And so, at Anastasia's request, to present what is involved in cognitive assessments and how to use the information from a cognitive evaluation in directing treatment with children, adolescents, and adults, having a better understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of cognitive function and across these ages. So the objective for today then is that I will go through a cognitive assessment. It's a Wechsler, but I will explain further. So it's basically what is entailed in this evaluation, what each area purports to measure, and how we can use all of this information to gain a really good picture and understanding of a child or an adolescent or an adult, to then better direct what our treatment should be and how to formulate it based on their profiles of strengths and weaknesses. Okay.
Laura, thank you for introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Olena Hayevska. I'm a practicing family system psychotherapist, and I'm also practicing ABA specialist. I'm working with children with special needs in different settings.
Okay, thank you. So next slide then, so we shall begin. Okay, so the three main areas of reason as assessed by the Wechsler's cognitive assessment are the following: verbal comprehension, visual spatial reasoning, and then fluid reasoning. And I want to just point out that I am using the assessments, the evaluations of assessments by the Wechslers, which then include the WIPSI, which is a cognitive assessment used for young children up to the age of 6. Then there is the WISC, which is used from the ages of 6 to 16, 11. And then there's the WACE, which is then covers from age 17 on to the age of 98. But these are all fall under, this style of evaluation. There are other assessments that also measure cognitive functioning, and that are based on very different frameworks or theories of intelligence. And there is the Carol Catalhorn methodology or framework of assessing cognition, and that looks at basically 7 structures of intelligence, and focusing mostly on fluid reasoning and crystallized reasoning. There's also then the Luria framework, and the Luria framework looks at how the brain's different groups of the brain work in concert or work together and simultaneously in intelligence. And so, this is a very different. The Wechsler is slightly different from those two, but this is the one that the Wechsler assessments are the ones that are most commonly used in hospitals and the ones that are commonly used in school districts. So this is why I chose to present on this particular assessment. So as I was saying earlier, so there were 3 areas of reasoning, and then there were 2 areas of what we call cognitive processes that support these 3 areas of reasoning. So we're going to slowly unpack the first 3 areas of reasoning. Okay, next slide.
Gloria, and which of assessments, cognitive assessments, is the most popular in the United States? Your opinion?
Yeah, I would say that the Wechslers are probably the most popular in the United States.
But doesn't it also depend on the state? I know that some states prefer other tests over Wechsler.
Yes. So because of some inherent, so California I'm more familiar with California. Does not, I believe, use the Wexlers. They use other cognitive measures because of there are biases inherent in assessments, and California does not choose to use the Wexler.
Biases, you mean race biases, correct?
I'm sorry?
You mean racial biases, correct?
There's some biases, right? Cultural and yeah, linguistic biases. Yes.
Mhm. Okay.
So under the verbal comprehension reasoning index, there are two subtests that are used to measure verbal reasoning. And now I just want to point out that in all three reasoning indices, they're all measured by using two subtests. So each one has two different subtests that look at reasoning from different perspectives, but however, it is to assess verbal reasoning. So the subtests on this index measure the ability to recognize verbal concepts. It measures verbal knowledge, which is our lexicon, our vocabulary, our ability to engage in verbal reasoning, so manipulate language to be able to understand and reason, and be able to express our knowledge using language. Concrete and abstract verbal reasoning is reflected by how the student responds, the words that they use, and and their level of understanding in analyzing, and it's also influenced by the age of a child. So the younger the age, we are to expect that the reasoning is going to be a little less flexible and more concrete versus as an adolescent or an adult who's going to be able to think of language in more abstract terms. And so I'll give examples for those. So in similarities, this is a subtest that measures our ability to categorize information. And so the student is giving, or the child is giving two words and asks, how are these two things similar? And so, a young child would compare, let's say a table and a chair, and responds with, well, they're both hard. They're both made out of wood. And so that's very concrete. That's really looking at, more of the features of the two verbal concepts. Whereas, furniture. So there was furniture would be a more abstract response, and then the subtest becomes more complex, where there are questions, for example, in how is love and animosity similar? And so those are more they're language concepts, but they're more abstract language concepts. Vocabulary subtest is very straightforward, and so basically it's just asking a person to define words. And here we get to see how they organize their ideas, how they're able to express, their reasoning or their thinking to a listener. And there were in this subtest in particular, you see that either a child is going to give, really short answers and require a lot of cueing to elaborate, or if the person is going to be able to then present a response that's very complete.
Gloria, talking about this subtests, how does it look like? What an example of similarity and this vocabulary, like a sentence, just to understand.
Okay, so for example, if on similarities, how the question would be, this is one that's between the children and the more older age group. It would be how are spring and fall similar, and so that would be a question. And in vocabulary, it would be define a living room. So they would have to give a definition of that.
So, but if we go away from this just verbal concepts, it's pretty much a person's ability to categorize things, correct? And pretty much a person's ability to explain what a thing is. And let's say if we don't use, how should I frame it? So it's also reflected in the person's ability to see similarities and differences between people or among people, person's ability to see the differences or similarities between different contexts. Let's say how this country is similar or different from this country, how this environment is similar or is different from this environment, how this room is different or similar from this room, correct?
To be honest with you, I don't know if I'll be able to extrapolate, that, but in essence, that is still categorical reasoning. You're grouping, things and concepts together. So I can see how that could be extrapolated. But yes, it's one's ability to analyze, the similarities and the differences, and be able to group based on features that are common.
How do we develop this index? I mean,
I'm sorry?
How do we work on this index? What kind of exercises should we give to a person to tap onto this reasoning?
So if they have an academic difficulty, so sometimes, with the ability to, to analyze language, you have to have the vocabulary. So this is an important piece for both subtests. You have to have that lexicon. So you do have to build on a child's vocabulary across all areas. So it could be math vocabulary, it could be vocabulary in social studies, vocabulary, let's say in sciences. And so, a child, you need to be able to understand, comprehend the words, the vocabulary, in order to be able to then to analyze them and to be able to manipulate them. And so building vocabulary is essential. Also being able to form groups, so like when they're learning phonemic development, words are grouped together, family words, and then being able to group things like, cities and countries, foods or animals, so really, practicing and developing that idea of focusing on what are details, or what are similarities, characteristics that are consistent within a particular group. But you have to start really with vocabulary.
But also, can we also, if we work with people who are not really verbal, can we also give them tasks, like visual tasks, like, okay, how these two things are similar? Can you categorize, let's say, this number of objects, and they will have to just say, okay, this cow goes to sheep because they are animals. This apple goes to a pear, or to grapes, or to a lemon because they are fruits. This object,
Right.
Yeah. So we can give different exercises to tap into this index, correct?
Right, exactly. So for nonverbal or much younger children, you have to use pictures, or you can use cards,
Or
with
objects.
pictures, details, or objects. There's an assessment that uses colored chips, and usually when I start working with a child, I just want to get a sense of their ability to categorize information. So these chips are in different shapes and colors, and I just ask them to play with them. And some children will group together based on color, or based on shape. And so yes, you can use either make something that you make in terms of using cards, with different colors or different features. Like you can have cards that have letters printed in bold, and other cards that have letters printed in just regular text. And then, so then how do you group those? You group this according to bold versus regular text. So it's being able to then to develop something that they can work with, whether it's a manipulative or not, to be able to distinguish characteristics.
But when it comes to developing concrete and abstract reasoning, what do you think about drawing? Is drawing also a development of abstract reasoning?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. It could be.
Because at the end of the day, writing is also drawing.
Right. You're writing the thoughts. Yeah. No, that is a really good point, because sometimes if you can't put the words into,
Yes,
together to be able to express yourself, then you're going to draw something.
So at the end of the day, if you cannot produce verbally something like make sound, you can also develop a non-verbal, but writing skills or drawing skills, like anything you can produce, but you can still write, or like make show to communicate to a person that we can talk.
Right, exactly. Picture stories. Yeah.
Picture stories, yes, like PACS.
Yeah.
Right. Communication system, or sign language, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So, but then does it mean that we can slowly, I mean, even if we cannot develop verbal vocabulary, we can still work on this concrete skills, like concrete and abstract reasoning, by teaching a child how to draw, teaching a child how to see a difference between, I mean, see a similarity between a real object, like 3D object, and a picture, because that's still concrete
To abstract, yeah.
concrete, but more abstract.
Mm-hmm.
But then like an object to a printed word.
Right. This is an association. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is developmental. I mean, that level of reasoning is developmental. So, usually we start with very concrete bases and then develop into more abstract reasoning. So that is, you can, with interventions, I don't see why you cannot, influence that, but it's still a developmental process.
But does it also mean that the person should be exposed to a lot of manipulatives as a child and know how to really manipulate them and play with them and like put things
Yes.
together? Yeah, so
yes,
we
absolutely.
start absolutely with like concrete 3D objects and then slowly move to like printed pictures or like written words.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And Gloria, sometimes parents ask, we are bilingual family and we have 2 languages. Is it okay if you say writing is so great and drawing is so great for children? Then is it okay to use both alphabetic systems altogether just because a child likes it? And we already developed 2 letters, and why not? Or it will stop somehow what we are targeting. I don't know.
You mean language development?
Yeah, I can't. Yes. What is?
So as a bilingual school psychologist for many years, we have always recommended as bilingual, my colleagues and I, and also the research that, it is that one should never stop using a native language, and that a child has, that cognitive flexibility to learn a second or third language. But it is important that I think that the context within the language is consistent. And so if, at home, learn, the child expresses themselves in the language of the home. In my experience, it's Spanish. And so the child is learning Spanish and speaking Spanish with the family, and then being exposed, having that immersion in school in English. And we do recommend that, that they continue that, they continue, the setting and conditions of one language versus setting conditions of the other language. If a child has a pretty typical, intact language development, the transition from first language to second language is usually pretty, follows a predictable process. What we have encountered in a field is that sometimes parents feel like they have to speak to the child in both languages at home, and at times that creates some dissonance. And so there are 2 different language structures, and so you want to that are being classified by the child, and so you really want to be able to make sure that that first language is very solid, before you introduce a second language at home. My recommendation is always keep one language, in the house, and the child's going to be immersed in the second language, or the language that is used more by outside of the home, because they will be immersed in that. And studies have shown over and over again that children who second language learners, or have possess 3 languages, a capacity for 3 languages, that initially you don't see the gains in cognition, but as they get older, you do see the gains in terms of their flexibility, because an item, an object for them has 2 names, and that's perfectly normal. So this item is called this and it's called that, or could be called that too, but it's still the same item. And so that does promote cognitive flexibility, and that certainly is a benefit.
I have a different question. What do you think about the situation? It's very typical. A situation that I've seen in my practice. For example, a person signs up for an ABA therapy, and either a family or a therapist or both sides decide that they will start working with cards, and somehow play would not be promoted or reinforced. how do you think this situation might affect verbal comprehension? I mean, development of verbal comprehension. So the situation is we only work with hard cards. We do not work with real manipulatives, like real life objects, and the play is not being promoted. How is this setting going to affect verbal comprehension index?
To be honest with you, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. I think that is something more for someone who is an expert in language development, to answer that. But certainly, the more experiences that a child has, whether through play, exploration, and with real objects, the better their development in vocabulary would increase.
I mean, because I feel like, as we said earlier, as we talked about earlier, I mean, we moved from really concrete to abstract. So my thought would just go down the road like, well, a picture is not a picture of an object. It's not concrete enough for a child. If we talk about a child with special needs and with poor verbal skills, we start with real manipulatives, and we do promote play because they need to learn how to manipulate an object or multiple objects together before they go to an abstract thinking.
Yes, yeah. And again, that is a developmental process. So it's going to happen. But yes, but it can certainly be influenced by increased exposure and by frequency of that exposure, and the quality of the manipulatives as well.
Mm-hmm. So we do not inhibit that developmental process by no means.
No.
Promote it. Okay.
Okay. All right. Next slide. Are we ready to move to the next slide?
Alena, what do you think?
Okay.
Let's go. Okay, it's about my favorite blog, working with blog design.
So this is actually a great area for me too. So then the second area of reasoning is measured by the Wechsler's cognitive assessments. It's called visual spatial reasoning. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, all of these reasonings are assessed using two subtests. And so the block design and visual puzzles are the two subtests in this index. And they look at the same capacity, the same reasoning from very different perspectives, or very different approaches, I should say. So the subtest on this index measures one's ability to create that visual imagery and rotation. So it's an abstract imagery. So it's be able to take an object in space, in your head, and be able to manipulate it and orient it, and then be able to analyze, the perceptual and spatial information, that you see, whether it's on paper or something that you have to, imagine in your head. And it also then looks at parts to whole reasoning, which is being able to understand how the concept of a whole is made up of different parts, and then as well, how different parts make up a whole. So the ability to abstractly conceptualize a whole is again influenced by the age of a child, and also the rigidity and flexibility and thinking of a child. So in block design, the student has a design in front of them. It's one-dimensional. They're given blocks, and they have to imitate the design that they're seeing on the stimulus booklet, or when you use iPads, on the iPad. So the student looks at the design, and they actually have to create that design in their head. So they have to really visualize or imagine, that design in their head, to then to be able to understand how they put the parts that they're manipulating together to imitate the design. So this one does involve, more of the, putting together. So you're putting together the pieces that make the whole part. Visual puzzles is the approach is quite different. So here you have a puzzle that's already completed, and then underneath that picture of the puzzle, there are 6 options of 6 pieces that make up that puzzle. And so the initiate the initial items are very concrete, and so they're pretty much in the same orientation as the puzzle. And then the puzzle has lines to show you that it's made up of 3 pieces. But as the items progress, the line disappears. So it's just a puzzle without the lines in the middle. And then the individual pieces underneath are going to be rotated a certain way. And so this is really tapping into that ability, that flexibility to be able to, rotate an image in their head. So this, this is one of my favorite subjects, but it really gives you a lot of information. And in terms of, where this is seen academically, so it has an impact, in math and in reading and in writing. In terms of being able to, in math, obviously being able to imagine, that when they're learning, shapes, being able to understand the shapes, and then later on in geometry, being able to be able to rotate that shape in space when you're doing your reasoning, your proofs for geometry. In terms of math, it's being able to understand a concept of a whole, such as things like money and time, and let's say calendars as well, decimals, fractions, and then that whole is actually made out of pieces. So that it does impact the reasoning in that. And then also in reading and writing, being able to understand how details are put together in a story to create a plot, or how details are put together to, create a character, to develop a character. In character development, the pieces of information are sort of strewn along, as you progress to a novel or a story, and you have to put all those pieces together. And in writing is being able to, think of the essay that you're going to write and be able to put it together. Putting the pieces together to create a plot or a summary or idea or an argument. And so, this is basically that kind of reasoning that this index measures.
How about the social emotional development? Let's say a person has a poor visual spatial index. I mean, you gave very beautiful examples on how it might be reflected academically, but how about on a social emotional level or relational level?
And again, it's the parts to whole reasoning and attention to detail. So I think it's being able to, again, I was making reference to character development. There are the pieces of information of a person, that are being put together, and I think that it's being able to understand another individual, being able to take their perspective. Let's extrapolate this. Where they as in a relationship or an interaction, you're sharing information and pieces of information. And you combine those together to understand that individual.
How about an ability to see a person as a whole, and also being able to see a person from different perspectives, and being able to understand that one behavior does not define a person, or one thought does also not define a person. It's a complex of factors that affect one human development.
Right, and I think that's part of that cognitive flexibility, that this taps into, I think.
Mm-hmm. And also, how about the daily living skills? So a person with poor visual spatial index, how will they feel in the space or move around?
Was a person with special needs who's learning a task. I think that let's say they're following a schedule. I think they will need, a visual schedule to understand the components of the day and how that makes up the course of a day. And then even, let's say, for the tasks like cleaning your room, I mean, I think that being able to understand that, that you just don't clean that corner, being able to understand, all the components of that room, of that environment.
You don't wash just socks, you also wash other things.
You could. Right. So yes, it is. I mean, you definitely could extrapolate it, but I mean, in terms of interventions, again, it's using visual cues, being able to support that imagery in the head of something that's whole, and abstract, by visual cues or pieces or manipulatives.
I would like to extrapolate even further. I apologize. Okay, so let's say I'm an ABA therapist, right? And I develop a plan. So if I have a good visual spatial index, I need to see treatment development as a whole. I need to have a vision. I need to know how to get to. I need to be able to divide the tasks into small steps and details and be able to guide a person through those steps, correct, to my picture.
Right. If you have it, right, your end goal is going to be the whole picture, and how you get there is going to be the details and the pieces. Yes. Yes,
And
absolutely.
okay, so if I do have a very good visual spatial index, then I can be a successful therapist.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, right?
There may be other factors too, but yes, I
I
mean,
mean, yeah.
Yeah, in any treatment, it is important to know what your end goal is. You don't want to
Mhm.
enter treatment or intervention haphazardly and hope that it all works out. You have to have an end goal, and that should be sort of that whole picture. This is what I'm addressing. This is that whole picture that I'm addressing, and then how do I get there? Um, whether it's task analyzed, whatever the approach is, you want to be able to, develop things incrementally to put those units together.
So, but then it's also, I also should know what goes into that whole picture, correct? I need to know the pieces of the puzzle.
Yes,
I
yes,
need
you
to
need
be
to know the
educated.
details to understand, right, the parts to whole, how the parts are going to complete the whole.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question regarding web-oriented technologies, which we have a lot nowadays. If we use them to make this index stronger, would it help us, or would better use traditional games, toys, whatever we're using, and materials, or it's better to try to investigate and search for something very new, maybe with immersive technologies, something which may help to also make us flexible, or it's not about flexibility any longer?
Well, I think when parents often ask, how they can, help their child in certain areas, and this one comes up. I always recommend, that use puzzles or blocks or Legos, and puzzles are particularly a favorite of mine to recommend, because again, you can start with very 5-piece puzzles, and then work up to, I don't know, 1,000-piece puzzles, which I personally can't do, um, but it takes a lot of patience, and that's another that's another factor. But when puzzles are great because they you can it helps promote looking at visual details, looking at the corners, looking at the boundary of the puzzle, looking at the individual pieces, even a 5-piece puzzle, and then seeing how that goes together, and in other visual details are like the coloring, what is the color of that piece, is it an end piece, does it have a certain coloration that needs to go in a particular area. So it really does help what we call visual spatial organization. You're organizing that piece within, a framework, and putting it together. So puzzles have always been, and a manipulated that I recommend, and along with Legos, but just the richness of the information, the visual information of puzzles, really lends itself, to support this parts to whole reasoning
But what about
and spatial reasoning. Yes.
But what about the digital therapy part?
I'm not as familiar, to be honest with you.
It's rapidly developing.
It is, and I should become more familiar with it. But I would think that if it's something like, for instance, I love Tetris, and so being able to know how things fit, and so in games like that, I actually, I would recommend as well. But if it's anything that's helping you analyze information, spatial information, or even being able to rotate and be flexible in how you are abstractly thinking about an object, in 3D. I think that anything that supports that would be fine.
Like anything, including web-oriented technologies that can support, like tap into that index.
Say it again. I'm sorry.
And including web-oriented technologies that can tap into this index. If they can't
Yes.
tap it, then yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So I do have another question. I apologize for so many questions, but still. So if we talk about the parts to whole reasoning in the context of teamwork or group play or anything that involves people, like multiple people, or working on a project together, if I do not have a good, like well-developed visual spatial index, that I might be having, so this is the question, I might be having challenges in understanding what my role as a part of a team is, correct? I might not see how what I do might be reflected on the team level and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting extrapolation, but yeah, sure. I mean, I think, again, a team is a whole concept.
As a whole
And the
thing,
members,
correct?
right, and the members are individual parts, yes.
And so, like the same thing comes. I mean, the same problem then is with play, correct? It's a developmental thing. People need to learn how to understand different parts and the whole thing, and that's why, let's say, group play doesn't come into play until a certain age. They need to have like this knowledge and this education.
Yes, you mean with children in play? Yes, children in play tend to be very selfish initially. They don't share, and then they understand that when they share and they work in a group, make things go smoothly. Yeah, again, that's also very developmental. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so this is the last area, reasoning as measured by the Wechsler assessments. And so matrix reasoning is one subtest and figure weights is the other. And this, to me really encapsulates, what is measured, let's say in the Carroll framework in terms of, being able to analyze and use logic and then be able to apply that. And so the subtest on this index measures one's ability to analyze and recognize patterns and sequences and be able to integrate multiple pieces of information simultaneously in order to do an effective analysis to then be able to have a response, based on that. And so it also taps into one's ability to apply previously learned knowledge to problem solve. So previously learned strategies, whether in a formal or informal setting, and to be able to apply that to a novel situation or a novel problem. So it's, looking at a problem, being able to analyze, that recognize the pattern or the sequence and, say, okay, I've seen this before. What strategy did I use in the past? And then be able to apply that strategy that was used in the past to that new problem to be able to solve it, efficiently. And so I also like to say that it's like connecting the dots. It's like, oh, I remember, this, this looks like a lot like a situation that I had before, or this problem looks like something that I've seen before, and be able to use those strategies and adapt those strategies to the new problem. And so it really, again, fluid reasoning to me really looks at the a cognitive flexibility, because you really have to tap into past experiences and and what you learned in the past to be able to apply them and tweak them to whatever the problem was, whatever the new problem happens to be. So in matrix reasoning, a student is presented with a block that has it's divided in 4 parts. There are 3 pieces of information and one is missing. And so the student has to analyze, the information that's there. And again, you're looking at visual detail as well. And so you're looking at the child looks at the pattern, whether it happens to be, a sequence or a pattern, because it becomes more complex as the test goes on. And then be able to predict, what is missing. And figure weights, this is assessed by presenting the child initially with a scale, and a scale 2 things are equal, and so 1 piece of information is provided. So it's basically this. If this is supposed to be the same as that, then which one of these represents the answer should go on the other side. It becomes more complex because then the child's presented with 2 scales, and so basically I call it the analogy that I use a verbal analogy for the logical reasoning. So it's basically like if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. So that's the sort of the reasoning that's behind the figure weights subtest. And so it has a lot of implication for math, because there's a lot of logical reasoning, that's tapped in this area, both in matrix reasoning and figure weights.
How about language and reading? Writing?
Well, in language and reading certainly is being able to tap into previous experiences. So, in reading, we make connections to to ourselves. We make connections to an experience that we had or something we read before. And so it's being able to, okay, this reminds me of that, and being able to put it together to gain a better understanding. Yeah, it is. The word fluid really means having that capacity to be fluid, not rigid, being able to, take in all your previous experiences and information and pull it together.
So exercises like write an essay on how this book might be good in your life, they tap into the development of fluid reasoning.
Write an essay on a book, like a book review.
Like write an essay on how this story that you read might be useful in your life.
It could be, yes. Yeah, I mean, yes, because in that respect,
Because
they
you do have to connect the dots, like you have to
right connect,
and analyze the plot and see how it's relatable.
Right, and be able to predict, say this is how it could be. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. For me, just the idea that it is somehow connected from my point of view, because working with fluid reasoning, we all together need to receive and get information and data from visuals, from space, and this like next step, or I don't know, the same stage, but we should make it together, because otherwise the capability to think logically, to solve problem is not developing so easily and not so fluid as is.
Right. I think this area is fascinating. But I mean, to me, what I when children play and explore, and they're learning cause and effect, and I think in essence, that's how you develop strategies as well to problem solve. And so let's an example, like given if a child is jumping into the puddle and the water, that the water comes out, that's a physics concept, and so I think child exploration, child play, creative play is really important in in developing that flexibility and those experiences that then they can apply later on. If I do this, then this happens. You're developing a problem solving strategy that way. That works, because if it doesn't work, they'll realize that no, I'm not going to apply that strategy.
What's interesting for me in this paragraph where you talk about patterns, ability to analyze and recognize patterns and sequences, I think that's when it comes to an SEL, social emotional learning curriculum, or like training. At the end of the day, what we do with children and other people is that we teach them how to see their patterns of thoughts and patterns of behaviors, and how they react similar or like in the same way, let's say in multiple situations. And what we have to do is to teach them different strategies and how to react to different situations differently. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. Exactly. Right. Because it's a unique problem, and each one is going to require a unique strategy.
And sometimes if we see that the situations are similar, then we can teach a person how to react more similarly.
Yes,
and the pattern.
Right, exactly. And in order to be able to connect the dots, to apply, like this is the strategy that I apply to this particular problem. A lot of demonstration is really helpful. Models are helpful, demonstrations are helpful, and definitely practice and repetition. So you go into practice using a strategy until you're able to then internalize that strategy and own it and be able to use it independently on your own. But yes, this students who are children who have difficulty in this area, in terms of identifying the patterns and sequences, really need a lot of that exposure, that their frequent exposure and practice.
Well, that's probably also a big task for me. Let's say if I'm a therapist, I also need to know how to recognize a pattern in the behavior, and pattern in the thought, a pattern in feelings, like patterns overall in multiple settings, and see how those, like all these things are connected.
Yes.
For me, it's
I would agree.
important to generalize. So whatever we do, it's important to have tones of different exercises just to make it generalized everywhere. That may help. And it's not easy to do.
Right, exactly. Right. I mean, it's basic generalization. You use this. You've used this as a strategy that you learned, and you're applying it here. So let's say in school, this is a strategy that's being used for particular skill development or behavior change. And so if that strategy is reinforced or practiced in a different setting at home, that really supports calcifying that strategy, and so that person really internalizes it. Yes, it's definitely very important to provide those experiences across settings.
So that's where we talk about being on the same page.
Yes. Okay. So then you have your 3 areas of reasoning, and I like to refer to them as the 3 areas of reasoning as sort of the house, and then there are 2 pillars that hold that house up. And so the house is the learning process or learning, and then the pillars is what supports that house. It supports the learning. And so working memory, both auditory and visual memory, and processing speed are cognitive processes that support the learning process. These are very key. So, usually impairment in memory or impairment in processing speed is going to affect the learning process. And so, being able to understand, deficiencies in these areas really will help you understand, how that student is learning, how his learning process is being sustained. So I find this very, very key areas. So for working memory, for auditory and visual working memory, so these are assessed with 2 subtests. Again, one actually has 3 components, and the other one just has 1 component. And so for the auditory memory, we provide a subtest called DigitSpan, and DigitSpan has 3 parts. So DigitSpan has the first part is in which I present the student or the child with a series of numbers, and they're asked to repeat those series of numbers in the same way that they were presented. And this is what's called DigitSpan Forward. And DigitSpan Forward isn't necessarily a memory task; it's more of an attention task. Being able to, being able to inhibit any other kind of interference and being able to focus or selectively attend on the information that's being provided auditorily. The child is warned that the information is not going to be repeated. And so it's almost like a cognitive cue for them to be, okay, now you got to pay attention. So the second part of this subtest is called DigitSpan Backwards. And here the student is provided with numbers, a series of numbers, and then they have to then take that series and resequence it and provide the sequence in a backwards order. So for example, if I say 2, 1, they have to say 1, 2. And it becomes increasingly more challenging. And then there's 3 digits, 5, 2, 3, to 3, 2, 5. And, up to, the numbers of digits, of numerals provided does increase. And so this subtest in particular really does tap into the working memory, because you are holding onto the information, you listen to information, you're attending, holding onto the information, and then being able to manipulate it in your head, and then be able to provide it. And so that does require a lot of simultaneous processes at the same time. So it's attention, detailed, and be able to have the flexibility. The next component of this subtest is called DigitSpan sequencing, and here the student is given numbers, and they have to put the numbers in order from small, in order from small to large. And so there is a degree of number sense that is embedded in this. The children need to understand that 2 is larger than 1, or 5 is larger than 3, in order to be able to sequence the numbers in order. And so if there's a deficit in that area, if they're having difficulties in math or difficulties in number sense or number value, place value, then this might be challenging. And so it may not necessarily be a working memory issue, but it could be more of, you know, a number sense or a number understanding number concepts issue. And so, you know, the sequencing also looks at being able to understand, you know, the sequence of numbers, again, based on the value. But so it does tap into what we call sequential reasoning, you know, being able to understand, you know, what comes first, second, third. And so I always do give the example of students being able to understand how to complete multi-digit math or division or multiplication problems. You know, there's a sequence to solving those, or algebraic problems or geometry problems. There's a sequence that needs to be followed, and so that is, you know, part of your sequential reasoning.
So a person with poor working memory will have problems with holding on to multiple factors, correct? And like working on one problem. They will probably be able to remember about like very like limited number of things, like let's say variables, when they try to problem solve.
Yes, right. And so, you know, it's when you're asking students to read a story, repeat a sentence, you know, students who have a really difficult time holding on to the information tend to either remember the very beginning or the very end, you know, and then, you know, information is missed in there. So yeah, so, you know, students with working with auditory working difficulties, they should be provided with information and what I call spoonfuls, you know, so in pieces, so they're able to, you know, hold on to each piece. You know, if you give, you know, a child at home multi-steps, you know, pick up a shoe in the living room, can you just, you know, bring them to the, you know, to the bedroom while you're in the bedroom? Can you bring down the laundry bin to the basement? You know, if you're adding a lot of those steps, they'll do one of those three, but they may not do all three. So you know, so it's
instructions might be very challenging. They can follow one instruction, but maybe not 5 at the same time.
Right, exactly. So you have to understand a child, you know, what is their working memory capacity, the auditory working memory capacity. You know, because in a lecture, you know, an older child is going to have difficulties holding on to that all that information, you know, so they may need to have it recorded. They may need to have a syllabus or an outline in front of them, because it'll be really hard for them to recall all that information. Or a classic one. Right, exactly. A lot of cognitive cueing, or, you know, examples, you know, open your book to page 25, you know, under, you know, section B, do problems number 1 through 5. You know, some students may just get the book page number, but I'll forget what the problems are. And inevitably the one's like, huh, what do we have to do? And so, you know, they're not able to hold on to all those pieces. Okay. Picture span is visual working memory. So the student is initially presented with one picture, and then 3 seconds later, they're presented with a set of pictures. Let's say 4 pictures, and they have to select which one was the one that they saw previously. It becomes more challenging because then it's 2 pictures, and the number of pictures increase. The complexity in picture span is that they have to remember the pictures that they saw and the order that they came with. So again, sort of tapping into that, you know, sequential reasoning. And it's an interesting test because they, you know, they have their stimuli, you know, their pictures, their 2 or their 3 pictures, and then they can observe that for 5 seconds, and then the next page you can have 10 pictures. And so, you know, this really taps into your ability to selectively attend on the details, pay attention to those visual details of the pictures, and being able to see, you know, to remember the order that they came in. And it's difficult because these pictures are very abstract. It could be a book, a planet, you know, a hat. So there is no real association between them, you know, as they are with numbers, you know, because there is an association with numbers or letters, but the pictures are a little bit more abstract. Oftentimes, you know, you see students remembering the pictures right away, but as they were increased in the number of pictures presented in the stimuli page, in the stimulus page, you find that students, you know, engage in verbal rehearsal. So they basically will say, hat, shoe, string, you know, and then, you know, keep that verbal information in mind, and then to be able to recall the pictures. So this also will tap into, you know, the language capacity of the child.
So my question is that sometimes when we see people who are inattentive, we might take it very personally and say, okay, that person really doesn't pay attention to me because they don't treat me with respect, they do not like us, like whatever. So, but that might be a problem with a working memory, not a problem with respectfulness. I'm saying it might be, not because
right. No, it's true. Right. No, and we hear this all the time, that he's really not listening to me, he's not paying attention,
this student is rude.
is rude, right? They're not hearing me. And that's not it. It's like they could certainly have, attentional issues and not be able to, to capture what's being said and hold on to it and retain it. So no, it's not disrespectful. It's really not being able to retain that information that's being said about someone.
So that's where we talk about the importance of actual testing and see if it's actually the memory issue. I mean, the working memory issue, or that's a social emotional skill issue.
Right, exactly. And if you actually, so if you understand a child, you get to know the child, and how they function in different settings. You're going to see that problem crop up everywhere. It's just not going to be as if it's a working memory problem. It's going to happen across setting. It's not just going to happen with one particular person. So it's under. So you really. Can I give this? I think it's what I hear in schools often. So if the teacher is speaking to the parent and saying, well, I give the directions and they don't follow it, I always have to repeat them. They always come back to me and ask me to repeat the directions, or they're asking their peers. At home it would be the same thing. I asked them to bring down the laundry basket and he didn't bring it down. I asked them to, lock the door and they didn't lock it. So they're forgetful, and both, their memory is, depressed regardless of the situation or the task.
How does it look like in behavior? I mean, as behavior analysis, we usually allowed to work with forward sequences, forward approach, like when we are getting a lot of data and then go forward. But looking at this information and listening to you, I understand that we should do forward and backward all together, because it's also important to do different patterns to see how sequence can be can look different.
Right. So
I
if
have experience of this. Yeah.
So if you're teaching a task that, let's say, something you task analyze, yes, I think, what is the step before here? What was the step before that? To sort of have them think about the previous step, because then you're making those connections, that this step, needed to be there in order to do the next step. Yes, I think it's important to develop that flexibility.
Okay.
Yeah, to identify, those steps in sequence.
So the goal is to choose tasks that will develop forward reasoning, backward. I mean, forward reasoning, backward, and sequencing.
You're right, definitely forward, right? Because I think that if you're doing it going forward and going backward, you are creating that sequence. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I can think of it always, like I said, too, brushing your teeth. You can't get your teeth are not going to get clean if you don't put that toothpaste on it. So it's there is a sequence to that task. And if that's a task that's being taught, you teach the sequence in a number of units that the student can hold on to and comprehend at a time. But then adding that piece of, okay, before we would do this piece, what is it that you have to do before? What is the step before that?
How about social emotional functioning? I mean, when it comes to building relationships, or when it comes to, yes, like pretty much SEL.
I think working memory is, for me in social, to extrapolate it to, that arena is, in remembering, someone is, revealing something about themselves, and, in a social interaction or, in a relationship, is being able to remember, those details that person said. I think that's important, because then again, if you can't, recall the information, that's being deemed as being disrespectful. like, you didn't pay attention. It wasn't important enough for you to pay attention. But if the person really truly is not able to remember, then that's just, it's part of their, their memory. It's not they're being disrespectful.
Okay.
You're welcome. Next slide. So processing speed. So the two subtests on this index are both timed. And that's a feature that sometimes sort of puts pressure on this on the child. If they know that they're being timed, sometimes that really creates pressure for them, or some anxiety. And some children prefer to know that they're being timed, and some children are just better off not knowing that they're being timed because of the anxiety component. But the subtests on this index that measure associative memory, I'll explain why, graphomotor processing, their speed of processing visual information quickly and efficiently, and associative memory. And so these two subtests are really influenced by executive function. You have to be able to selectively attend. You have to be able to monitor your responses. In the first one, encoding, be able to shift your response sets. And then also inhibition, not to inhibit an impulsive response, which is probably like an automatic response that you have, and then be able to sustain focus on the task. So in coding, the student is presented with a row of boxes on the top of that page. And on the top of the box, there is a number. On the bottom of the box, there is a figure or a symbol. And each number is from 1 through 9. Each number has a different symbol. And then underneath that, there are boxes, but the boxes are all in rows, and so the numbers are on top of the box, but the symbol is missing. And so the student is taught through demonstration, that you have to use the key to be able to make the mark or the symbol that goes with that number. So that's the associative learning piece. You're associating a number with a symbol, sort of like a letter with the sound, or a number with a value. And this one does measure graphomotor speed because the student actually has to make that symbol, within the boxes. And usually what we find is that students who really have difficulty with the associative memory, they have to keep referring back to the key, rather than be able to say, okay, the 6 has this mark. They constantly have to refer back to that. And so that lets in terms of interventions, that they're going to need some visual supports present in front of them, to be able to perform. Symbol search is slightly different. It's an approach of measuring processing speed because it requires a motor response, but basically the student just making a slash. So they're presented with a symbol, on an outside of a row, and on the inside of the row, there's a group of symbols, and they have to quickly match the symbol. So if the symbol on the inside is on the outside of that row is matched by one of the symbols inside that row, they circle it. And if it's not, then they put a line through the word no. So for the younger set, it's usually one symbol. For the older children, there's 2 symbols. So they really have to focus on details and work very quickly. So again, the visual ability to focus on visual details. And as I said earlier, executive function really influences your capacity to perform these 2 subtests efficiently, and these really let you know how a child, if they score, if there's processing speed, if they perform with poorly in this area, it could be about attention, it could be about visual memory. It could also just be about their approach to the task. They could approach it very quickly because they find it really appealing and challenging, or they can approach it very methodically and very slowly. And so, once you get that score, you see that number, you really have to look back at the individual subtest and really then think back about the student and who that student is. Is it someone who's cautious, or is it someone who's a risk taker? Because you'll see the approaches really reflect the personality of the child. So if they scored low in symbol search, well, maybe that is a child who just needs a lot of repetition, a lot of practice, extended time, to process information. maybe some check-in, at some point, did you understand this, or have them verbalize what it is that they're doing, because they're just going to process that information, at a much slower pace. And that's just who they are. They either, like I said, they either have fire under their feet to do it very quickly, or they just have really slow burning embers. And so that, the processing speed, may reflect, their approach. If the student works through it very quickly, and attention or executive function, negatively influenced, so that if they're just going through, they're not selectively attending, they're not monitoring the responses, they're not shifting, so they're not recognizing the 2 has a symbol, the 6 has that symbol, and then make those kinds of errors, then they're, that impulsivity in their response style is going to increase the number of errors. So it is important to understand the child in terms of how they end up performing on these 2 tasks.
So if I have a poor working memory but very high processing speed, that means that
There's a combination.
I can hold on to very small pieces of information. I can problem solve only with this many variables in my head, but very quickly.
But very quickly, right?
But very
right.
quickly, like very, very simple tasks, but very quickly.
Right, and because exactly, yes.
Okay.
And hopefully is right. You can develop.
And hope it's right.
Right, because this is how efficient, how efficient is your brain working? Are you, are you really, focusing and monitoring and being able to, inhibit, interference from the outside to get your task done, and also, how your eyes work together. So visual perceptual skills also may be a red flag if a student really has a hard time, being able to, copy the symbol, or be able to, sometimes, there are rows on the symbol search, and if a student misses rows, that's a question. Is like, was this visual perceptual, or was this the response style? So it's always important to go back to the subtest and really analyze the errors and put those errors in context of the child, of what you have learned about that child.
I see how important it is because of slow processing speed. I'm just saying one word to sum it up, that it's really important because with slow processing speed, we have this dyscalculia or auditory disorder, whatever. We should also think about it as a therapist.
Right, exactly. When you're giving directions, or when you're first introducing an intervention or something, you want to be able, like I said, you can do a verbal check-in or have the student repeat it back to you. Did you understand that? Did you get that? And you have to be aware of how fast you're speaking to the child. You need to speak at a rate that they're going to be able to process that information. So if you know that someone who requires an additional response time, you really need to be sensitive to that and be able to explain things at a pace that they're able to process, and knowing that you may have to go back and repeat that, but it has to be at a pace that a student, because otherwise it's just very frustrating to present something rapid fire very quickly and expect the child to get it, because if that's your particular learning style, it doesn't mean that that's the learning style of the student. And so in that respect, we do have to be aware as providers of services to children that we have to know who we are as learners as well, to be able to and be able to understand that the way that I learned is very, could be very different from the way that the child learned. And so you have to be cognizant of that. And perhaps strategies that work for you, not necessarily going to work for every child.
But aren't we talking right now about about self-awareness and also visual spatial skill, like being able to see myself, and also like the parts to whole reasoning? I am separate, that person is separate. We have boundaries, we're different. I learn this way, that person learns this way.
Right, exactly. Because otherwise you're just setting yourself up for frustration and for failure. So you really, you want to set your conditions that you get the optimum result, or the result from the student that you're working with. And so in order to get there, you really have to have a good understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of that child.
But that also means that I have to be flexible enough to shift from one thing to another thing, to shift from myself to your child, from a child to myself, and see how we are either similar or different. But I feel like that's also that very first sub-test test that you talked about
Yes.
similarities
Yes, being able
and
to shift.
verbal comprehension.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yes.
I mean, like, I'm talking about the similarities and
The
differences.
similarities.
Yeah,
Yes.
the similarities is one.
Oh, we different. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there were others, and to gain a better understanding, of a child in terms of their, their cognitive processes, their memory, their attention, and in memory, that can be very complex too. There are other neuropsychological measures. And so one is called the Reaster with complex figure test. The student is presented with a figure. It's a very odd looking figure, but it's one of my favorite tests. An associate would know. And, the student is presented with this figure. The instructions are to copy it, they can take as long as they can, again, to sort of abate any anxiety produced by timelines. And then they're told that they're going to draw the figure 2 more times. They don't know when they're going to draw it, but they are told that they're not going to have that visual in front of them. So again, you're given the cognitive cue of pay attention while you're drawing this. And so the student is asked 3 minutes later, you do an interfering activity, so something that's going to be different from that task. And then you ask them to draw it again. And then they get to draw, you ask them to draw it again 20 minutes later. And I love this test because you can really get a sense of, you're looking at visual perceptual skills, visual spatial organizing, is the student drawing the house more or less with that symmetry or the same size as the one that they were presented, or is it really small? Is it in this corner? Is it at the lower part of the page? Where is it that they're placing that, that drawing? And again, it's a visual spatial organization. And then visual memory, visual perception, are they seeing the figures as it is being shown? And then visual memory, paying attention to those details. And their approach to it is really interesting as well. Do they start with the whole copying the entire house and then add the details, or to do it segmented with the details, to show a complete house? And that's really important information as to their learning. The NEPSI 2, it's actually a foreign assessment, but it translates as a developmental neuropsychological assessment. And this is an amazing neuropsychological assessment. It really taps into so many different aspects of neuropsychological functioning. And there are different subtests there that would specifically really look at attention. And also for the students with ASD, there were subtests there that, also include, pictures of children, and it's their ability to, work with those cues and their reaction to it. That's very interesting. The RAML 3 is, it's a wide range assessment on memory and learning. And again, this looks at both, it looks at auditory memory, it looks at visual memory. It's really a very neat test. And there's another slide where I talk about the areas that are impacted by depression or PTSD. And so visual memory, verbal memory is impacted, executive function is impacted, visual spatial skills are impacted. And you can use this test. What has been shown in a study, and it is in another slide, about the differences, that, how depression affects verbal memory, because the performance of students, who show PTSD or depression, really differs on some of these subtests. The Wisconsin card sorting test and the Stroop color and word test, again, these are attention, executive function assessments that looks at, being able to shift, do a cognitive shift if the cards, present a different image and you have to match it. You can't get stuck on the previous rule. You have to then apply the new rule, and being able to, sustain focus and monitor, again, sort of that flexibility. And with these tests, you really look at the errors. What are the errors that the student made? And then that's really important, to look at the results of these assessments. The behavior rating inventory executive function, second edition. This is a questionnaire form assessment, and it really does a beautiful job in looking at the various aspects of executive function. And the parent can complete one, the child completes one, the teacher can complete one. And it goes through all the aspects of executive function. So executive function basically is the brain's capacity to sort of manage itself. And so, and there are various areas. It's your ability to initiate a task, so to start a task. Some kids start something right away. Other kids, it takes them forever just to get started, on a task. Then it also looks at your ability to shift. So if the task requires a different response set, your ability to recognize that and change and adapt and change your response set to that. Whether it's a schedule or a task, it's your ability to have that flexibility and shifting. It also looks at your ability to monitor your work. So as you do in your work, are you keeping track of what you're doing to be able to recognize errors or not recognize errors? It's your ability to plan, and again, I said it's almost like initiating, but it's not just initiating, but also being able to plan something in the long term. And so in terms of therapeutic, if someone has a really difficult time with organization and planning, you really have to be very clear about all the steps involved, because they're really going to need that. They're not going to figure out, an example, let's say, that I can give for academics is if the student is doing a project, a science project, or any kind of, say, a social studies project that requires different components, they need to know what the timeline is, when's the deadline, and then how do I get there? What are the different parts that I need to do in order to get it done, by that time. Organization, monitoring, planning, shifting. So I like to say that it's sort of the brain's manager. And so, people who have, deficits in this area, I say it's like in the brain, the manager left for lunch, never came back, and the office is in an uproar, and so nothing gets done. So so it's the manager of all those processes.
Pretty much, some people need a lot of structure. Some people are fine with less structure. Some people are okay with changes. Some people are like, no.
Exactly.
There should be 0 changes or I will crash. I'll collapse.
Right. It's too much, right? That emotional component's like, I can't deal with it. Yes, exactly.
And the emotions I'm getting, God, how do I manage them? I cannot.
Right. Well, I mean, usually you find that, with the F that, there's a lot of anxiety involved, not being able to monitor your work and not being able to make that change, that shift in that cognitive shift, depending on what the demand is. And that could be very anxiety producing. Not being able to finish your project. Right. Not being able to finish your project on time. That's very anxiety producing. So yeah, these definitely, I think, have an underlying, an emotional underlying.
Okay.
So social emotional assessments, and again, I highly recommend that the student is understood, and you gather a lot of information about the student, who they are as a person, and that certainly includes the social emotional aspect. So social emotional assessments, observations, clinical interviews, and then all informal sources of information, are important in sort of developing, getting that picture. So I call a child a blank canvas, and you have this blank canvas, and you start to add information based on all your sources of information, and eventually you will have a really good, picture of that child. The behavior assessment system for children is a questionnaire form. I mean, these actually, in fact, depression inventory is also a questionnaire form, and the children's depression inventory is a questionnaire form. And so, you have those sort of data-based formats for acquiring information on their social emotional functioning. And then you also do interviews and observations. You interview the child, interview the teacher, particularly where there's going to be different, settings and conditions in those settings, and observe the child in those different settings and conditions, to see how they respond, either in a structured situation, unstructured situation, with, with a lot of interference or disruption or distractible, factors, or with minimal distractor factors. Those are all important in how one functions.
That makes me want to think a lot about how the context, the environment really affects the intelligence development, the IQ. Yes, we are born with some parts, but we cannot take away the importance of the environment.
Right. The environment is very important. It is a huge factor that will influence that. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so for PTSD and depression are correlated very highly. And so, and, PTSD obviously is from a traumatic event, where, and depression, not necessarily, but, if there's a trauma involved in a child's life, it's very important to get that information. Again, that's through your interviews. So the diagnostic criteria is that, this, it's something that's personally experienced, witnessed, or been confronted by an event. Their response to the situation involves intense fear, a sense of helplessness, horror, or disorganized or agitated behavior. And they exhibit at least one of these symptoms associated with the experience of a traumatic event. So if they've had a traumatic event and then some time has passed, and let's say they're in the classroom or they're somewhere, and there's a trigger that is associated with that traumatic event, it's going to evoke some of those feelings that they experience in the trauma. And so it's really important to understand, like I said, the history of the child, and particularly with trauma has some very significant effects on cognitive functioning. So in the next couple of slides, I just wanted to sort of encapsulate again, what some of the findings have shown in terms of trauma and PTSD. And I've gone into how it could affect their areas of reasoning and memory and processing speed. But here, so studies have shown that trauma, PTSD, and depression negatively affects the verbal and visual spatial reasoning. So those are the ones that have been shown to decrease. And if you do the assessment, their overall IQ is then going to be down as well, because these are two indexes that are calculated into the full scale IQ. So emotional processing and visual spatial processing depend extensively on the function of the right hemisphere. So in understanding why is it that visual spatial reasoning and visual memory are impacted in children who experience trauma, and they're really both functions pretty much generalized in the right hemisphere.
So what do we do? Do we provide a lot of structure? Do we reduce instructions or demands?
I think we understand your child, understand the child that you're working with, and if they need that structure, I think that's important. Structure can look very differently from one child to the next, and see what it is. How can you help be aware that this visual spatial reasoning is going to be weak, so you have to support that area, and be aware that that verbal memory is going to also be weak. So again, if you're doing dialogue with the student, just be aware that their verbal memory is going to be impacted, so you have to be able to accommodate for that.
So probably have shorter conversations, more prompts.
Shorter conversations, yes. More prompts, check-ins, make sure they do understand, help them connect the dots if they can't do that, with verbal memory.
Provide safety.
Yes,
to
yes.
calm down all those emotions and connect, and at the end of the day, connect emotions back to the person. And like connect the emotions and the behaviors and like everything together, like pretty much put the whole puzzle again together for the person, but in a very nice, very nice, gentle way,
right,
to avoid the traumatization.
Exactly, yes. So the next slide, so executive functions also, so it's not just verbal memory, verbal reasoning and visual spatial reasoning, but it's also executive function is impacted by PTSD and depression. And so in terms of all those different aspects of executive function that I talked about before, it has been found that more specifically, it's the inhibitory control. So it's that ability to be able to inhibit a response and not just go into automatic mode, not just use a response that you used before. Planning, again, being able to plan out or over the long term. And then cognitive flexibility, and that's one that's that's very important for our everyday adapt. We adapt by being flexible in our thinking, and so that ability to be flexible or shift is really important. And then be able to sustain focus. One of the things that this study that I read in particular indicated was that inhibitory control is really correlated with fluid reasoning. And so if you're doing a fluid reasoning task, if you're trying to to analyze and recognize that a strategy can be used, for a particular situation, if you are suffering from depression or from trauma, you're not going to be fluid like that. So you're going to automatically do a response that you've done in the past, and it's probably going to be one that wasn't effective. So, and so it is really, it's really important to remember this. So, kids with depression or PTSD and trauma, the inhibitory control really will impact fluid reasoning. So it's like doing the same thing wrong over and over and over again. So using the wrong strategy again and again and again and again.
Makes me really want to think about the regression that happens to people who are traumatized. Like, let's say, if I am frustrated and traumatized, I mean, the ability to think before I behave is not gonna happen.
Right, it's not gonna happen.
It's
Exactly.
not gonna happen.
Right, because you're gonna go into your automatic response. This is what I did before, whether it was really effective or not, but this is what I did before. It's really important to understand that piece. Why do they keep doing the same thing? Well, because they need to be redirected, right? And so here, in terms of therapeutic treatment, so this is where I think the CB cognitive behavioral therapy is really important, because these are you want to reason and you want to be able to develop a new strategy and implement a new strategy. And so being able to understand what's the trigger, what was that behavior that you used all the time that you don't want to use again, and then what the emotional response, and then
the cognitive response as well.
Right, exactly. And
are they synchronized or not?
Right, exactly. And so it's when you're developing those plans, CBT, remember, that maybe perhaps you want to make sure that you're aiming at cutting down that impulsivity and to be able to then introduce a new intervention, a new strategy.
But that also means that we have to promote acceptance, patience. We should slow down. We should. I mean,
if the end goal is to be effective, then yes, I think those are
a lot of patience, a lot of understanding, a lot of calmness, promote calmness, safety again, to help those emotions to come down as well and just go back to reasoning.
Right, exactly. Let the reason be on its own. Yeah. Exactly. And not let it get all muddled up with everything else. Yes.
That's a very difficult task, though.
It is a very difficult task.
Because,
yeah.
For example, when you are in a therapeutic setting, for example, I would get a client and the family pays me money, right? And I need to do something with the client, with the child, let's say, or like like whoever. They would want quick results. I might want quick results. The person might not be ready. And then I would give an instruction, or I would give a task, or we'll work on something, and then the person will make frequent mistakes. And my job will be to be okay with the person making frequent mistakes.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And again, it's understanding your bias as a therapist. This is the child. This is what he can produce. This is what I'm expecting, but it's not what he can produce or or do as well. And the parents, and I think that educating the parents as well, is really important. Saying this is what their strengths and weaknesses are, and these weaknesses are going to interfere with his capacity or her capacity to engage and apply the interventions. It's really important that the parents understand that component as well. So know who you are as a support provider, and then also know who the parents are to be able to explain that. But understand the child so you can explain that to the parents.
Yeah, but the problem is that the parents might be also traumatized, so that means that I also have to be okay with the mistakes, or
yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and and in working with the parents and educating them, you also have to if they're also impacted by trauma, you have to are they going to remember what I'm saying? Are they going to recall what the end goal is? I mean, so their memory and their executive function is also going to be impacted.
So I might have to provide a lot of prompts to the parents as well. Check in with them very often if I want to be efficient and effective.
Yeah, I remind you, this is what we did today.
Mhm.
This
Give
is
information in smaller chunks.
right. This is a piece of a strategy that's going to get to the long-term goal. But this is
the
what we did
dot.
today.
This is the next dot. This is how we're moving. Period.
Right, exactly. Because we want to see those dots connected as well.
Yeah, I think this practical strategies is very important because theoretically we also talk to people, but when we talk practically, how to accommodate index, how to make it easier for the family, then they are in the focus of our attention, and that is what we are looking for in our work.
Oh my God, I really forgot to say therapists might be also affected by trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, know your own bias. Exactly. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's very complicated. That's a very complicated situation.
Right. Depression. We talk about this.
Okay, so I talked a little bit about the verbal memory, but this was something that was shown in a study that I thought was fascinating. And so depression and PTSD negatively impact verbal memory, which was mentioned in a previous slide. So participants, children of all ages were participants in a study that showed that there was poor performance. So in verbal memory, you can recall information in contextually, like a story or someone's experience, or you recall things in single units, so like word lists or numbers. And so, or letters, I should say. So participants in the study showed poor performance on story recall compared to word recall. So if they were read a story and were asked to, identify the details or summarize or repeat what you remember from the story, their performance was weaker and having to remember a story than it was if they said, okay, here's a list of words, table, candle, cup, sink, and then they have to repeat those words. And so one of the hypotheses that the study purports is that story or contextual recall of verbal information requires one's capacity to link chains of verbal information. So in a story, there are verbal, there are linking chains of verbal information. And then the failure in linking those semantic units or the pieces of verbal information, it's what it appears to be the real issue impacting memory process, so not necessarily that they have really low verbal capacity, but it's that, since it's impacting verbal memories, being able to put those units, those pieces together.
So what are the practical implications of the findings of this study?
I think that the important piece, again, if you're giving, explaining to parents, if the parents have also gone through trauma, is, explaining to parents, you want to be able to do it by spoonful because contextually they may not just not get
one step at a time.
At a time, yes, things sort of like in little spoonfuls. And in terms of the client, again, the same thing, and then help them, sort of link. So this is what happened, or you did this, and this is the next step, and being able to using language, being able to link those semantic units.
So maybe journaling might be helpful, right? Even if you don't see the sequence, but if you take like notes every single day, at some point when you have the mental capacity to go back and reflect, maybe you can look at your notes and see, oh, this is what I have been going through. Oh, this is what have been happening to me. Oh, this is what has been happening to my family members.
Yeah, that's a great point. Exactly. Journaling is wonderful for that because you're really documenting, the verbal experiences, and then later on to be able to reflect and link them. Yes, journaling is a wonderful approach.
But it also means that I have to have, if we think about visual spatial, like moving from one place to another place, that also probably will mean that I will have to have a lot of visual cues to show to a person, okay, to go from A to B, you need to go here and here, here and here. I will have to direct very often.
You mean with cognitive cues with the journaling?
No. Now I'm. I apologize. Like now I'm talking about like going from one location, like physically from one location to another location. If I don't connect the dots, I might forget how to. I might have challenges, like problems at getting from point A to point B. especially if it's a new context in a new country. Let's say I had to immigrate from one place to another,
Right.
which is already might be a very difficult story just outside of trauma.
Right, exactly. I mean, you're adapting. I mean, that contributes to even more trauma. You have to adapt to the new place and the social norms. You know,
And when my fluid reasoning is affected and I had to move, so it's an extra load on my reasoning.
Right, exactly. Right, because the fluid reasoning is impacted.
Fluid
Exactly.
reasoning is impacted, sequencing is impacted, verbal comprehensions, like a lot of things are affected, and like, yeah, and then I had to move.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot. It's a really complex trauma.
So what might help to a person then? In
Well,
addition to journaling.
Oh, in addition to journaling for this particular one,
Mhm.
you know, I think that, you know, sort of building on that contextual recall. I mean, it could be, you know, let's say with someone with trauma, I'm just going to extrapolate here, you know, that it could be that recalling the, you know, the context is just too difficult emotionally. And so just, you know, recalling that, you know, some bits and pieces to then eventually, but then that has to be documented somewhere to then eventually being able to pull together, you know, that experience. Because what you're doing is just organizing that experience and to be able to process it as a whole, not just as individual parts, but process it as a whole experience, and to be able to comprehend it better.
So this requires a little bit of psychoeducation. Like, for example, if I go through trauma, I also need to know that I am not at the point right now. I might be at the point where I cannot connect the dots because I don't want to
Right.
connect the dots. I mean, emotionally, it's too overloading. But at the same time, I need to know that this is how my brain works. This is how I function as a person. But also, that means that I have to accept it.
Right, right. You know, with with adolescents that I worked with in the past, you know, as a school psychologist, you know, during, you know, if I'm working with them you know, in a counseling situation, I always try to help them understand who they are as a learner by understanding their profile. You know, and generally kids have a sense of it. You know, I agree. I love it when kids says, you know, I remember better when things are written down. You know, they have a sense of what their strengths are. You know, this is how I learn better. And
But at the
so
same time, we really have to develop other ways of learning.
right, exactly. But you know, but let them know this is who you are. This is what we need to make a change in. You know, to sort of improve your efficiency or your capacity. You know, for memory or learning and working with them on that. Yes, I think it is important for them to be aware, but also to help them make those connections.
I almost feel like that's why psychotherapy is very crucial for people who are experiencing trauma or when they, at the moment, they're experiencing trauma, because that's a place where you can talk things out and safely connect the dots.
Right. That's a whole issue of safety. You need to feel safe to be able to have a trusting environment, have a trusting person for you to be able to yeah, you're exposing.
And talk it out,
Right.
express it. For children, it's to play it out if they cannot talk, but for adults, if they can talk, then it's all about
Right.
expressing it.
Yeah, the sense of safety is important.
And living through the emotions that could not be lived at the moment, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the therapeutic recommendations that we basically just talked about is so through clinical, and this just serves as a reminder. So through clinical interviews and observations, it's important to gain an understanding of the social emotional strengths and weakness of the child or the adult or the adolescent. How does, you know, let's say, for example, how does structured or unstructured conditions impact the child? You know, some kids actually thrive in unstructured, you know, conditions, and a lot of people don't. I mean, for one, I can do a lot of work in a coffee shop, you know, where there's a lot of noise around me, because then that helps me isolate, you know, and really focus. You know, but if I'm in a really quiet library, you know, I'm just going to just start having my mind go off the deep end and thinking about everything else. So structure versus unstructured is really important to know. So how does it impact the child, you know, both emotionally and cognitively? And then comprehending the individual cognitive strengths and weaknesses of the child will allow for more. So you can really, you know, getting a good sense of where are they strong and where do they have weaknesses. Well, you want to develop your intervention that's going to tap into those strengths to support the weakness. So knowing the strengths and the weaknesses, not just the weaknesses, but the strengths, are really important. Interventions may initially focus on supporting the child's ability to regulate or control the impact of their emotional or traumatic experiences. And we were just chatting about this. And you're right, it's, the experiences of the therapist, of the child, and of the parents. It's everyone involved. And then, in order to help regulate, the emotional response, it's relaxation or thought-stopping techniques, should also be considered, for to support a more positive response to the intervention. Because if the child is, or the person is just constantly ruminating on the same thought over and over again, you want to be able to do that, cut the chain, use some thought-stopping techniques. So that relaxation and sense of safety is, a sense of safety is really important.
What about physical exercises?
If that is what helps, in my testing, I don't, is working with a child, I've recognized that they need a physical break. And they really do need that physical break. It's like hitting the reset button, or hitting pause. They really just need that, whether it's a physiological need or an emotional need, they might just need that, because otherwise you're just working with someone who's overwhelmed and flooded, and it's not going to be effective.
I remember a child, Gloria, you supervised that child. We did play therapy. God, that was fun. Because we had so many physical exercises. Yeah.
Oh, I remember.
You remember that guy?
Right, yeah. It is really important,
Loved it.
to have physical breaks, if that's what it's called for. Okay, and I think we're at a last. There we go. The questions. I think you have asked many good questions, Anastasia. But if there are any additional questions, I can be contacted, or they can contact you.
You're right. Where is your email address?
Oh, you're right. I did not include my email address. But you can add it to that.
I will do that.
Yeah. Okay. So you can add my email address to that. Because there's, the neuropsychological and cognitive testing just provides such a wealth of information. When you really start putting all that data together, all the put parts to whole, you start really putting all those dots together. What emerges is a really good sense of that person. In terms of their cognitive functioning, but also to a degree who they are. Their emotional functioning as well. Are they are they impulsive because they give up quickly, or are they impulsive because they're impulsive? As you get to work with the child, you get to really understand all those aspects.
Always impulsivity developed, reinforced.
Right, exactly.
In behavioral terms, it's always the same.
Always the same? Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
This is a lot of, I really